Hi, I'm Dan from Update My Dynaco and Akatika LLC. Today I'm going to show you how to install the Stereo 120 Complete Rebuild Kit. So all you need to do it is the kit itself. You can print out the manual, I've done that over here. And I've got a Stereo 120. So let's get started. First thing is, make sure the plug is out. Turn it over. And we're going to remove the 4 screws that hold the perforated metal cover. So we're going to remove these 4 screws that hold the cover on. So now all the screws are out, and grab both the top and the bottom, flip it over, lift the top, and voila! The insides of a Stereo 120 with original capacitors, original amplifier modules, original power supply, and a lot of this stuff we're just going to take out. So before we take it all out, let's kind of see what shape it's in. And we'll plug the amplifier in. And let's see, when we turn it on, we may hear the characteristic bong. Let's see what happens. Not so much bong. Okay. And let's check a couple of voltages. This is C12, and that's the main power supply for the amplifier. It's supposed to have 72 volts across it. Wow, that's pretty close, 72.9 volts. That's C12. This guy over here is C9. Usually he should be about 95 volts. 94.3, pretty good shape. See if our luck holds up. Over here, we've got the output capacitors, and they should have about 36 volts on them, each one. That does not look too good. That one's got about 1.3 volts on them. And this one has 35 volts. So this amplifier module's pretty dead. This one over here might actually be alive still. Well, it looks like it's time to get going updating things. So let's do that. First thing we're going to do is we're going to turn off the power. The next very important thing we're going to do is unplug the amplifier. And then we're just going to go away from it for a minute or so. We're going to remove amplifier module, amplifier module, amplifier module, capacitor, 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 capacitor. But the easiest way to identify what it is that you're going to get rid of is if we loosen the screws that hold these modules in place. Can you see that screw here and here? Those 2 screws hold this heatsink in place. And once we've got that heatsink off, it'll be fairly easy to see which wires are going to want to be disconnected. Note that this bottom screw is also holding on a foot. And I'll take a minute to show you this foot also. That foot, you probably can't get in close enough without getting kind of out of focus, but the rubber is kind of cracked. This guy is about 40 years old. What you'll see now is this amplifier module is kind of loose and can easily be removed. We'll get to that shortly, but let's go, and we're going to just remove the other amplifier module and the power supply module. So let's get that started now. And now we're going to get just this last amplifier module. So all the modules are loose. Now at this point it's not like we have to be very scientific. The modules are coming out. So all we have to do is cut the wires that hold it in. So now we're just going to cut the modules out, find a wire that's kind of keeping it tight, and cut it. We've got these input wires here. Let's cut them close to the amplifier module. Power wire going across, we'll cut him. Wire to the capacitor, let's cut them. Almost free. Another power wire, cut him. Another power wire, cut him. And a wire going to the black binding post. We'll cut him kind of near there because we might want to make use of the length. There's one of the old amplifier modules, and it's ready to be put aside, never to be used again. Unless, of course, you want to sell it to someone on eBay. Alright, so let's do that again with the other amplifier module. Once again, we'll cut things kind of close to the PC board. Now, get rid of that last wire to C12. And there's a ground wire, we'll get rid of that. So if you notice, I hope you can see it, there's only 2 wires remaining. Now those 2 wires come from the power transformer. We'd like to leave these wires as long as possible. You probably could cut it right here and everything would probably be okay. But in this case, I'm going to make the choice of desoldering those wires so we can preserve the maximum lead length coming out of the power transformer. Alright, so I've got a second pair of hands here, and Cameron is going to pull the wire while I heat and desolder. Okay, pull. And we're going to do the other red wire now. And pull. And we have now preserved the whole length of the wire, which is a really good thing. Actually, these 2 capacitors are going to go away. This capacitor is going to go away. This one will be replaced, and this one will be replaced. So, let's start removing things. And it's not particularly rocket science, so we'll just kind of get you started. And you can use your imagination for the other couple of capacitors. Let me show you a little trick about saving some old wire to use for your new build. Here's one of the output coupling capacitors. And what we're going to do is just roll off, about a foot of wire. That's much more than we'll need, but this way we can reuse this wire when we're hooking up the new amplifier module. We can do the same thing with the other capacitor, and we'll roll off about a foot of wire. And cut him. Put those 2 caps, say goodbye. And let's take a look at one more thing actually while we're pulling the caps out. See this capacitor and resistor here? These guys are known as Zobel networks. We don't use these external Zobel networks anymore. They're actually going to be replaced by something on the new amplifier boards. So we'll cut those 2 guys out. Let me hold it up so you can see it. And we just want to cut the wire that goes to the resistor. And the wire that went to the capacitor. And the wire that goes to the other capacitor. And the other resistor wire. And now this is gone and becomes history. So at this point, with most everything out, you may want to just look around. You'll find a couple of stray lock washers and nuts. And one other hint, if you're liking to reuse some wires, you can see the ground wires here from the black terminal posts. It went to this ground lug. we can just cut it close to the ground lug, and that'll save us a little work because we'll kind of be pre-wired for when we're putting the amplifier module in. This is a stripped down, dirty old Dynaco. If you notice, you can see where the chassis was beautiful, where it used to have great chrome plating. Right now it's got a lot of dust plating, I'll call it that. Let's see what we can do to clean it up dirty. Now you've got to figure out how much of a project you want to make of this. You could go so far as to pull everything else off. I've done that in the past. And then you clean the chassis up as much as you possibly want to with metal polish. I've taken these things and run them through the dishwasher. It's as much of a project as you'd like to make of it. We'll do something simple for now, and we'll join you back here in a bit once it's all cleaned up. So it turns out this one is really not too bad. With a wet paper towel and a little elbow grease, we're able to make a pretty big change in it quite quickly. And we've just found a couple more nuts and bolts in the corner. We should get rid of those. Here's the power supply with its heat sink, the controller board, the pass transistor. We're going to recover this piece of metal here, that's the heat sink. And the way we'll do that is we'll just unscrew these 3 screws, those 2 screws. Now the only problem is we've got this messy stuff on there. That's the old heat sink compound. And well, we could just try our old standby paper towel. Sometimes that's good enough to get it off. Let's go see. Wow, that worked pretty easily. Usually it's harder than that. There's old heat sink compound here on the bottom of this heat sink. That came off pretty easily. Sometimes you'll have to use isopropyl alcohol to get that to come off cleanly, but that came off so easily, I'd say we're done. So now that everything is pretty well stripped down, we're going to start building up again. And the first step of building up is getting a good power supply going. So we've taken and we've built up the PSUG kit, and it's ready to go on. Got all the hardware in place, and here's the old heat sink. Now the one thing that we are going to do before we put it together is, if you notice, this power transistor has a metal tab in the back, and we want to make intimate thermal contact between that and the heat sink. And to do that, we're going to take a little bit of the thermal compound, spread it on the back, and that will help us get good thermal conductivity. Wonder where that went. We'll just spread a little bit like that, and use a finger to spread it around. Recycle your paper towel. And this guy goes on here, just like that. And now it's time to install this into the amplifier. So let's get started. And we're going to make a red-blue twisted pair. And the reason we're going with a twisted pair is it tends to confine the hum fields, and it'll give you the lowest noise out of your amplifier. So we'll twist it up first, get it to a length of about 4 inches. And now we'll just solder the blue wire and the red wire. And then we've got one more pair of wires. That's going to be the pair of wires that I think will go to terminals 4 and 6. So let's get that started now. Nice and tight. And one more to twist and tin. Now the next thing we're going to do is install this wire here. And just give it enough time to get hot so you're actually getting the solder onto the wires. And always keep your soldering iron clean. We're going to replace the old 100 volt 1000 microfarad bulk filter capacitor called C9 with this new capacitor. And even though it's not quite as tall, you'll see it actually has 3900 microfarads, almost 4 times as much capacitance and then 4 times as much energy storage. So to make the transfer, we're just going to undo the clamp. And then we can probably just, capacitor came out pretty easily. So what we see is the new capacitor, the diameter is a little bit less than the original one, and even with the clamp pretty well tightened up, it's not going to fit. So we're going to have to build that up a bit with probably a couple layers of tape would be the right thing. So now we've got 5 turns of tape here. Everything is nice and snug. But I want you to look at one thing. See the way this screw is? This end of that screw is going to get horribly in the way of that mounting hole when you want to put everything together. And you will say bad swear words. And we'd like to keep you out of saying bad swear words. So a good thing to do is to take this particular screw and turn it around, because that way the long part won't interfere. The old C12 had 3300 microfarads. The new one in the C12 UU kit is going to have about 20,400 microfarads. That's going to make for a whole lot better performance of the bass, and I think you'll like the sound of things much better that way. So let's get started. Let's take a look down here. 3 of these capacitors to replace the one old large capacitor. And by doing so, we actually can get a whole lot more capacitance. We have the first foot in place, and you can see the foot from the back also. We want the blue wire to go to the negative terminal, the red wire to go to the positive terminal. Now we've just got to hook up to C12. We have the power supply installed and the 2 capacitors that go along with it. At this point, if we've done a good job and if we've built this board correctly, when we turn the power on, we're just going to get lovely 72 volts out of the new power supply. Let's do it. And it's a good idea when you're testing a power supply for the first time to be a little bit of a chicken. Because if you have done something unfortunate like put in one of these capacitors backwards, they will blow up and throw little bits of aluminum foil all around the room. It's really quite spectacular, but you don't want to be anywhere near it. So what we're going to do is we'll take our AC cord and you'll note it's not plugged in. I'm going to turn the switch on so I don't have to be anywhere near this thing when I plug it in. I'll just tell you guys out there, my cameraman has just taken a respectful 5 steps back. I don't expect anything, but prevention is always a good idea. And we'll hook this up and see what happens. Now you will note there was a little bit of an arc when I plugged in. We're charging some big capacitors now. But so far, no real drama. So let's take the next step and we'll measure the voltage across C12.
0.36. 71.3.4.
Okay, that's pretty good. It's supposed to be 72, and that's close enough for me. Before we go on, let's do some safety things. We're going to pull the plug. We're going to turn off the power. And we're also going to get an appreciation for how long these capacitors hold the charge. So you've seen how long this has been off. And what we're going to do now is measure the voltage on the capacitors still. What voltage have we got there?
63.0. It's gone down.
But if you'll notice, it's going down quite slowly. So we want to just stay away from this for a while until these capacitors bleed off. Now what we're going to do is take one of the amplifier modules that we've previously built, and you'll build if you get this kit. You'll have to assemble that. And we're going to fasten it to one of the new heat sinks. And these are the heat sinks that we refer to as the super duper heat sinks. So here is a super duper heat sink. And basically we're going to go like this using a couple of brackets. And for good thermal contact, we're going to take some of the thermal compound and we'll spread a thin layer. And most important, we want to tighten up this screw because that helps make intimate thermal contact and gets the heat out of the power op amp. Now the only thing we have to do is we're going to put mounting brackets on this side. And you'd like these brackets to sit pretty evenly. One way that you can encourage them to do that is to sit them on a nice flat surface, and then they won't turn quite so much when you tighten them up. Now we have a pair of amplifier modules. They're mounted to super heat sinks. The next step is we will install these amplifier modules into the Stereo 120 chassis. And you'll note safety first, the power cord is out, and I see that it is out. Really what's going to happen is we'll take these modules, and one will go here, one goes here, and we're going to hook up all the wires. But before we do that, we'll do a little bit of wiring in the chassis as we get all the grounds sorted out. So let's do that first. Now we're going to install a ground wire from here. We'll attach it to the chassis. We'll bring it into the power grounding system back here at the capacitors. And we'll also attach the ground wires from the binding posts for the speakers to that same lug. Let's get started. So this wire will go from here to here. One of life's great joys is having the right tool. So this is theoretically 18 gauge wire, and it strips in an instant. So right here is the lug with all the ground connections. And if you've noticed, we've got it kind of strung up in the air, which is actually good because you don't want to have it attached to the chassis when you're trying to solder, because the chassis would just suck away all the heat. Next thing we're going to do is tie that down to the chassis with another of our recycled screws and nuts. And we won't even need a lock washer because that lug has a built-in lock washer. Perfect. All right, and this side we will lay along the chassis floor and then just root it up nicely. To our ground business right over here. We do supply you with twisted pair, and that's what you'll use. We replaced both sets of input wires. The old stuff just, it looked kind of nasty after all this time. So now it's time to install amplifier modules. Let's do our soldering first, and then we'll tighten them in place. And the next thing we're going to do is hook up the output terminal. At this point, there's one very important thing that we have yet to connect to the board, and that is the power. So that's the last thing we'll do on this board, and then we will go ahead and do the same things on the other board. Fasten them in place, and we're about done. We have the power wire prepared. What we'll do is cut the extra so we can't get in trouble with it. And we'll double check. We've got red goes to VCC, black goes to power ground. Now we can kind of get this guy set up. So, we've got some thermal compound remaining. And spread it on the bottom. Take a finger and make a thin film. Set it down in about the right place. And for the other one, there's a foot underneath that one too, so let's grab a foot. There we go. Okay, firm. And we just have to take power wires. We'll attach the ground here. We'll attach the power over here to the other red wire. So at this point, we are almost done. We just have to hook up these input wires, that speaker wire, this ground wire, and some power wires. Our Stereo 120 complete rebuild kit has been installed. We've got our new power supply, a new bigger C9, new bigger C12, gives you a lot more power from the power supply for better bass. Super duper heat sinks, everything runs cooler. Amplifier modules with much lower distortion, a much cleaner first watt, and much lower noise than the original Dynaco modules had. I think you'll enjoy doing this kit an awful lot, and I think you'll really enjoy the sound. We'll catch you next time for the next project at Update My Dynaco.